Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Are you a movie buff or interested in film? Have you ever been curious to learn what it's like to work in the industry? Well, today's interview is with Justin O'Neil Miller, who is an art director in the film world, has been in that world for about 12 years, was educated in architecture at Georgia Tech, and went into architecture for a bit before making the jump into film. He has a pretty distinguished resume as an art director. He's directed on projects such as Black Adam, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Tenet, First Man, Ant-Man, Teen Wolf, and a bunch of other films. He also has his own independent film company, Alchemy Set, and through Alchemy Set, he has written, directed, produced 4 short films and won several awards for those films. So I was blessed to be able to get about an hour of his time and sit down and talk about leading in the film industry in a fast-paced environment full of stress, different team sizes, different team members, different project lengths. All in all, a really great interview. Very grateful for his time. Also want to mention to you that I am on social media, active almost daily. Facebook, you can find me at Communicate to Care. My Twitter handle is at JZDPhD. And my primary goal on social media is just to share different articles, different stories, different quotations, things that will equip you and encourage you and empower you for the leadership role that you're serving in. So like us, follow us, all the things you can do on social media there. But for today, enjoy this great interview with Justin O'Neil Miller. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of The Leading Lounge. Thanks for joining me and tuning in today. I've got a special guest, someone who is different than people I've interviewed before, Justin Miller. So, Justin, prior to you, I had like Army officers. I had a guy that runs a nonprofit, like school administrators, some pastors, like all kind of different people. But I've never had anyone in the film industry. So you work in the film industry, and you've been doing that for how long?
Nearly a dozen years now.
Yeah. So the first question I'd like to start with, which I'll just lob the question to you, and then I'll just get the heck out of your way, is can you tell us about yourself and your professional journey that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of have a two-pronged career in the film industry. One is as a writer and director, where I've had some success and continue to kind of nurse that in parallel with my career as an art director, on the path to being a production designer, which is basically like the lead of the look of the movie, of creating everything that gets put in front of the camera, basically. So the production designer is responsible for the locations, the built sets, the props, the set dressing, just the age and the finish and everything, to make everything in the world feel real. The costumes, and is there even the only things really kind of that you see on camera that aren't under the jurisdiction of the production designer is the light itself and the actors and like the makeup on the actors.
So when I'm watching a movie, which I don't do much of, but anything that I would see aside from those things you just mentioned is kind of in your realm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's like, ultimately the director is the creative point person of the whole movie, and they're the person that decides like how everything's going to feel essentially, but they can't make all the decisions about how to create like kind of a unified vision across all these different departments. And then so the production designer is that person. So I'm basically at this point in my career kind of second to the production designer. I'm kind of the chief of staff of the production designer. Oh, nice. So the production designer's job essentially is to have the vision for the movie kind of funneled through the director, because they're always serving the director's ultimate vision. But the director then has, jurisdiction also over the script, over the cinematographer that does essentially have command over the camera and the light. And, they're working with casting directors. They're working directly with producers a lot and all the, this thing's going to sell more and that thing's going to whatever. So they're fighting all those battles.
Right.
So they leave a lot of, and it's different for each director. And we'll get into that, I think, especially in my industry, just how different each job is. But like the production designer essentially will have extensive conversations. Nathan Crowley is a production designer that I've worked with a couple of times, and he'll basically just work with Chris Nolan, just the two of them together for 3 months before anybody else is on the project. Oh, wow. So by the time that like even that cinematographer gets on board, and sometimes maybe not even a casting director, because a lot of times the cast isn't dialed in until we're well into pre-production. We're building sets and stuff, and we don't know who like a lot of the actors would be. So yeah, that's kind of the hierarchy of the creative decision making, is the director, and then essentially under that is the cinematographer and the production designer as far as the look of the movie. So then the production designer's job is to have the vision for it, and the art director's job is essentially to affect that vision, so to make it all happen. So a lot of that, doesn't always feel as glamorous as it might sound, and it's a lot of spreadsheets and budgeting and personnel management. It's a lot of deep dives into numbers and just logistics. So a lot of it is really cool, and the world that I get to do that within is different every time. But it is interesting because it's like a whole new problem solving every time. So that's kind of like the overall responsibilities of my job. How I kind of got to be here is by way of being a set designer. So the set designer is the person who basically gets handed a small portion of the movie, and it can be on a location, or it can be on a stage build. That's kind of the two main ways of doing it. On a stage, there's oftentimes whenever you're inside a house, for instance, you will build that on stage, because to go and do it on location, you will have to go find the right house, which often doesn't even exist in the first place. It's like constructed in the director's brain. Oftentimes they also want to do crazy things like put a camera right where a wall would be, so you'd have to like knock out that wall, but then we can build it in a way that it can be easily taken apart. So there's a certain kind of realism that comes from going and shooting on location, but there's a practicality that comes from building it on stage. So oftentimes one of the first problem solving things is to figure out whether we're going to build anything. And I've been on some movies where we didn't build a single thing, and I've been on other movies where large portions of the movie were built on stage. So then the set designer basically will be given one, or sometimes on a movie there's one set designer, or sometimes there's not any, and it's just art director that has to kind of like do a lot of it verbally almost. But typically the language of the art department is drawings, and so the set designer is given, like, say, a house and or a boat or a spaceship, and I've kind of like, as a set designer, pretty much been given each of those types of things. And you'll read the script, you'll find out kind of the parameters and the requirements of what is needed for that set to work for the director and the cinematographer and everybody. And then you'll go through this kind of round of revisions on the design and drawing process where, it's like it'll start almost with sketches and end up with these detailed drawings that tell a carpenter essentially how to draw something. And it's dialed all the way down into, like nuts and bolts and screws and door handles and like
super specific.
Like where the outlets are going to go on the walls and all that stuff. Because if you don't tell anybody, and this will, I think, maybe be one avenue that we'll talk about here, is it's kind of amazing, I think, how carefully you have to communicate like these creative decisions that even me coming into the art department out of architecture, I had this idea in my mind that it was less, I don't know if clinical is the right word, or just that it was like a bunch of artists running around. And it's like, yeah, we need like a room, like let everybody get in here and figure out the room.
Super level of precision.
Yeah, but it's like, it really is this almost military like set up where every task is kind of like more or less defined in a system that's something like a common law system that's like, okay, well, an outlet, well, it's like if it's a door that's not going to open, that might be a different person than a door that does need to have action. And it depends, like all of these, there's all these different things that depend like where one department ends, the next one begins, because there's just an efficiency to it.
Yeah.
So, knowing a lot of that stuff ahead of time helps, but then inevitably on every show, partly because the nature of film is such that you are always kind of pushing the envelope in order to gain people's interest.
Right.
There's like almost always a situation where it's like, wait, who's doing this? And it's usually just trying to figure out who can do it the best, or who's the smartest department to do it, basically. And
right.
Oftentimes it's not the most obvious choice because of the specific person that you're working with or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a long way of getting to the point where I basically went to Georgia Tech for architecture, and I practiced architecture at some really cool places in Atlanta, Georgia, where we kind of spent about 20 years of our life. And the 2008, 2009 recession hit. I'd known for a long time that I loved film and I always wanted to be a part of it. And I was already kind of writing some projects and noodling with short films and music videos. And when the recession hit, I kind of, I got laid off pretty late into the recession by my accounting. I was like, well, I can't believe I'm still here at this architecture firm when every other architecture person I know got laid off. It was such a huge slowdown for that industry. So I was kind of ready for it. And I was like, woohoo, 2 months severance. Like I'm loaded. I can like definitely make the career transition now. So I just basically threw myself into making a short film kind of right off the bat. We were pregnant with our second child, Jude. And I think everybody, especially my wife's family, was like, what in the world is this guy doing? Like, how is he going to provide for...
Who did my wife marry, and are my grandchildren going to be all right?
I mean, malnourished little, art student children. So it was a fun and scary time. It's interesting to kind of look back on that first short film that we did and realize how we didn't really know what we were doing, but how it doesn't feel that much different.
That you made.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the short film that kind of got me into the industry, because I had no idea how to get into the industry, and by luck and the grace of God, they were just starting to make a lot of film in Atlanta at the time. So it's like the stars definitely aligned for me there. But I didn't know, I didn't have any contacts. I didn't even really know that film was starting there. It's like maybe there were some rumors of that, but it was nothing like today where, it's one of the leading like production cities in the world.
Right.
There was no infrastructure there. But
did you know anybody like already in the film industry?
No, I didn't know a single person. I don't think that there was, I still don't think that there's like a single person of overlap almost between my architecture world and my film world.
So you just kind of like perseverance, hard work, grace of God, kicked the door down, or like cracked it open long enough to see in there. And
yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing all that well, but I made this short film and knew that there were film festivals. I knew for sure about like Sundance and Venice or something like that. I knew that there were film festivals, and that was a place where people who make film must go. So I started going to a couple, and I remember I went to the Macon Film Festival where my wife's family was living. And that's near where I went to high school and everything like that. And so I went there and just kind of, despite my natural inclination, I think just started walking up to people and sticking my hand out and saying, hey, I'm Justin, and I'd be happy to like fill up your coffee if like I could be around a film set or something along those lines. And I inevitably, and this is like kind of what I always tell people when they're asking me how to get into the film industry in particular, but I think it probably holds true in general, is that is like, no matter what, like when I would call these people or go talk to them, it's not like anybody's like, yeah, actually come on over. I've got a thing right now that you can be a part of.
Right.
No, everybody, well, first of all, it's probably like, it's probably a little weird to have somebody come up and do that to you. And you kind of wouldn't mind somebody else vetting them out a little bit first. So you go, well, I don't know, like maybe we can have you have a card or something. So there's a layer of that, but then you get a phone number from them, and then you call them and you cold call them, and they of course don't have anything either. But then you ask for two people's names. Like, do you have a couple of people's names that I can call? Like maybe somebody, and you get two names from them. You call those two names, and then you've got four names, and you've got eight, and eventually you're just like calling, like you've got 50 people, and it's like your name gets mentioned to somebody else because like, oh, I don't know, I just heard this guy. Wait, you need some drawings for your film set? I know a guy who just got like out of the architecture industry, and so maybe you could talk to him. Like, they don't even know what connections they're making,
right?
Except there's like some little buzzword here or there. So that's pretty much exactly what happened. Was I just like kept calling people and kept getting more and more kind of connections until I was talking to some people in the industry proper without really knowing that's who I was talking to. But they gave me my first job, which I got to basically just start as a set designer, which was way more than I expected. Like, I definitely was ready to just fill people's coffees, right, and be a mule or whatever for years, just to kind of like get in. So that was another huge blessing. And, I remember the interview process and basically them telling me like, what the rate was going to be. And, architecture is like a kind of prestigious industry, I would say, as well, but especially as an architect intern and kind of like a grunt, it's not a very lucrative one. And I remember them telling me the rate, and I was like, oh man, that's like a little bit less than I was hoping to make based on what I was budgeting per month. And so I just like clarified, that's per month, right? Because it was like, I'm totally going to do it because it's like a little bit less, but that was per week. And so I was like, whoa, I was like, and that was like kind of an entry level position, and hired non-union, which is like kind of something we can get into if we want. But it was, for me, like basically being unemployed kind of for X amount of months, it was like this big boon to I was like, okay, I'm gonna be able to figure out how to take care of my family, doing this one way or another. So I mean, I've still like kind of been on that train the whole time, where like I said, my goal and my vision and what I think that God's intention for my life is to tell stories that are enlightening and hopeful and encouraging to people in general. But there's kind of like, I've always been able to lean back on that, the skills that architecture gave me, and this like little niche that I didn't even know existed kind of within the industry that I've always wanted to be a part of. So, we were chatting a little bit before about like how lucky we are if we can find like something that is useful to, a productive field, and that we also are good at, and something that we love doing. And it is like, it's not something that I always feel like I love doing, especially in the moment.
Sure.
Sometimes ready
to turn over some tables and
and sometimes it just doesn't feel, sometimes it's certainly, most of the time I would say it's not fun. It's often very like rewarding, even when it's not fun, that kind of thing. But I'm not sure how much I agree that like work can or should be fun, or at least it's like it should be rewarding and productive, I think. But hard work has a good reputation for a reason, because I think it's I do like to have fun, and I think I am known as somebody who there's a lot of laughter, I think, in our department, like almost even to some other departments' annoyance. And I think sometimes, especially up front, it's like, it might almost be hard to take us seriously, because like we're a little goofy.
Yeah.
But that's part of what gets us through the day, I think, because, it's this most recent job that I just had was probably the most intense version of this, but there's almost always a portion of a movie where I'm working 14 to 18 hours a day. Man. And on this movie, I was working 16-hour days for like 2 months straight, like 6 or 7 days a week. And so, it's like we've gotta, I think, like be able to laugh through that some. And
sure.
And
you probably have to have that sense of purpose that you're talking about, of just, okay, this is bigger than these 14-hour days for weeks on end. There's a bigger picture to it. So when you went in, the persistence, the knocking on doors, all that, was there any sense of that purpose, that like mission calling maybe to it that you were talking about, of like, I think this is God's intention for my life? Or did that develop after you were already in it for a little while?
I think so. I think, well, that was an either or question. And so the answer is yes, but, both, I guess, like, because it definitely has been something where there's never been like a really clear, it's like my mind has been filled with things that it feels like I can or should be doing, like both, I think, to satisfy whatever maybe personal or selfish like interest I have, and a calling from God level. But I just read this book called The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, and he mentioned in the whatever the thing comes at the end, the epilogue.
Yeah,
he said something like, that human beings are storytelling machines, and I think that's always been like way deep down in me, and it's something that like I hadn't maybe even heard it put that succinctly until just like last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that film is this incredible, like I don't know where I got this term from. It may have been something I came up with, but I've always felt like movies are empathy machines. And they're like just a way to not just even like read about or kind of understand like what another person kind of went through or experienced, but a way to like truly feel
right.
like another person in a way that I don't think any other medium does. Mm-hmm. I think I knew that before I knew how to articulate it. And I think as early as late high school, I like was falling in love with the medium of filmmaking for that reason. I think that I still struggle with trying to understand like what it is that, like what story it is I'm supposed to be machining.
Right.
But and it's challenging. That's probably a whole other podcast of like how to make that real and how to make it, something that is God breathed as well, like from a broken mind. But I think it's something that I'm still finding, I'm still finding that route. But I think that there was something on the horizon that I was aiming towards. I think that to some extent I do get to choose the projects that I work on, and to some extent I do choose those based on merit. So there's an aspect of that I think will always be there, as far as like this not just being a job, mm-hmm. and it trying to be something that is
personally fulfilling for you too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a few boxes that it checks for me. I think that I'm restless, if I'm in one place for too long. Mm-hmm. From one movie to the next, I'll be reading the instruction manual for the Apollo 11 for First Man, and like building the space, vehicle. Yeah. And then in the next one, I'll be like studying how to do like how to lay out a super yacht, or, another one that I did was for the upcoming movie Oppenheimer with the Manhattan Project and the gadget. Mm. So it's like I got to spend 2 months like studying how they got to the point of making the gadget, the first atomic bomb, and like really like I modeled it in 3D, like down to the nuts and bolts and stuff. Wow. So it's like I get to deep dive in all of this really cool stuff, and then when that gets boring, I can take like a sci-fi project or a fantasy project or a historical thing out on the ranch somewhere and study old barn building, and like so there's like there's a part of that really is helpful for me, because I think that I do need problems to solve. I think that that's maybe a big part of me, and a big part of what makes me good at my job too, is that I think I'm just always trying to like get out ahead of problems. And you don't mind solving one and then starting over on another equally complicated and time-consuming problem. Yeah. Immerse yourself in that. And there's certain people like me who are wired like you. And part of my own struggle too is you get put in a certain lane and you're like, how do I get out of this lane? Like, where are some different problems or scenery or whatever? But in your case, it's built into film. So let me ask you like a more technical or a pointed question, I guess, about
your role in film and the like different teams of people you lead. So I know your work environment changes. So like you were saying, you could work on this or that or this location or that location. And I assume you're always working with and leading new people. What would you say is the biggest challenge you faced with having this revolving door of team members, different locations, different challenges? What's something concrete maybe that you would say has helped you overcome that challenge as you go from project to project?
Yeah, okay. Maybe this is even too vague of a specific problem, but I mean, I would say that or challenge that, but it's like kind of like knowing who the right person is for the right job, especially once your network is kind of tapped out. Because I would say that, it's like when you're starting somebody new and you always like call to get recommendations and referrals and things like that. And so, I mean, that's something like what helps us overcome not knowing who the person is like trusting, like there's certain people that you can call and get an honest report about and that you can just completely trust.
Right.
So you lean into those people whenever you can. But I mean, it's like there were at least probably 24, let's say half of the people on the most recent project that I had never met before that project. And it often takes 2 or 3 weeks before you really know what people are truly capable of. Like, once you've kind of cut through a lot of the cloth up front of getting to know somebody and then being honest with you about what they can do and all that. And so by that time, it's like sometimes you're like already behind the 8 ball if it's not a great situation. So letting people go is tough, but it happens kind of a lot in the film industry. And
you do that once you make that determination about somebody, you're like, man, this is just not a good fit. Like, this is going to be more trouble than just go ahead and finding someone else.
Yeah. And I mean, there is a little trick to that, I guess, by basically, you kind of almost only ever hire somebody for 3 weeks at the beginning, and like, and we'll see where it goes
Give
from
you a
there
back
kind of
door
thing.
if you need it.
Yeah. And so it's like, at the end of the 3 weeks, if it was like not that productive, it's like, all right, it's great having you. It doesn't always go like that. And the kind of like higher up and the bigger the responsibility, obviously, that you're hiring somebody for, the harder it is to do that. But
sure.
But yeah, I mean, I would say that, and it's like that's certainly I think it's any project-based work environment, I imagine, is kind of like that, but it is probably unique in this one how frequently we have to do it. It's like, okay, that guy was awesome on the last movie, but he was great at, it's like the guy the set designer that draws airplanes might not be good at drawing the houses for Yellowstone. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, so you got this big picture project and all these pieces with a whole bunch of mystery behind them, and you don't know until you just start, right? Is that what it sounds like? And then you're like, okay, this over here is not working. This is great, so let's shift this guy, or we got to get rid of this person, or whatever.
No, that's totally it. I think more and more, the higher that I go, the more that I have to just kind of relinquish the fact that I do not know the parameters of the problem. It's like I'm getting to the point now where, sometimes in an interview or whatever, the director or the production designer will say, like, do you think that sounds like something that you can do? And my answer is like, well, yeah, but like, I don't really know what it is. So if you believe that I can do it, then yes, I can. As long as that person's kind of like on your team, I think it's something that you can figure out.
Right.
But
it's all overcomable.
Cause I almost have no idea what the problems are until well into my job's begun.
Until you're so far in that like, okay, you can't run away from the problem. You just have to figure it out.
Yeah. It's like on this racing movie that I just did called Gran Turismo. I think both the production designer and we read the script and we kind of, it's like we read it. It's a movie. It's a racing movie with like a few races and some things. And it wasn't until like week 3 or 4 that we were in there together and we were like, well, this is more and more difficult and complicated the more that we dig into it. And it kind of, continued to be that for a good while before we like fully understood what we were doing and the approach on how to get it done. And
you have to just know that going in and being okay with that is that I may run into something that's just a mess, or maybe way, way more than any of us could have foreseen.
Yeah.
Another question I've got. So film, and I only know this from talking to you and from talking to Chris Campbell, who I interviewed before you, but is film's high demand. It's a fast-paced environment. super intense working conditions, like you mentioned, working 15, 16-hour days for weeks on end. And so inevitably, you're under a lot of stress, but you still have to lead, whether it's 5 or 48 people, you still have to do that well. So leading under stress is one of the most difficult things, especially when like you're stressed and the people you're leading are stressed. I guess my question is, what do you do when you're in the middle of a project to just keep providing consistently good leadership to all these people who are under you? You're exhausted, you're frustrated, they're exhausted, they're frustrated. So how do you lead them when you're feeling just as beat as they are, but you still have to finish well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, I've started feeling like I've always dreamed of being this type of person that at least is that Thomas Jefferson projects, which is that it's like, I wake up in the morning and I like check the barometer and I record it in the ledger, and then I go about like my daily whatever, it's like he's got this like routine, and then and this is like, there's no reason that any man should ever have to go to bed after 11 p.m. It's like I've always like wanted to be that type of person, but I think I'm starting to come to the grips with the fact that like I might not ever get to be that person.
Right.
And that it's more like I have to like save stuff up. Like I have to squirrel things away. And there's like kind of these moments of like intensity in different directions in my life. So, I realized on the way home, like we took a detour on the way home from Europe from this last job. And I was like, some of it's felt a little self-indulgent almost. And it's like the fact that we were like diverting to Rome on the way home. Right. Mm-hmm. And was taking this time kind of and spending the money to do it. And I think I was feeling more like, okay, but I've got to do this because like I spent so much time at work. And even though my family was there with me for some of it, I didn't get to see them a lot. And right. So it's like, I'm like, I have to invest like this time and try to be present with them and do this right now, even though I want to be like writing the script that I plan to direct later this year. And I know that needs to happen. I think I'm starting to come to peace with that idea. So it's like inevitably when I'm working 16 hours a day, like I'm not finding the time to like read my Bible or exercise or eat regularly, like you said.
Yeah, everyone should do all the time.
Yeah, and certainly not check the barometer in the morning. So it's like, there's like
get to bed before 11 p.m.
Yeah, no, it's like I'll often get up at, I'll be in at work by 5 a.m. and I won't leave until like 11 p.m. or something, So, and then all I'm doing is just going home,
just crashing
and sleeping. So, especially to that point, it's like, I think that what I do is that I try to like really take the time to do those things when I do have the time to do them. And there's usually time at the beginning of the show and some time towards the end of the show where I do get to start to do those things again and feel human again. But, it is really weird when, there's, really intense situations happening and you haven't slept in like weeks and, you're eating whatever like bread is in the kitchen, like, because you literally like aren't taking breaks for those. Like, I'll work 16 hours straight really without a break and without a lunch break and stuff like, and luckily like they'll order my lunch and bring it to me and I'll eat it while I'm doing stuff. And it'll be like, there'll be a line at the door of people waiting to talk to me. And it'll be like, I'll need to go to the bathroom and one of those people will have the meeting on the way to the bathroom kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's like, there's portions of this job that was that intense. And so, I think that there is a part of my personality to like sometimes, even though I wish that I was a little bit more like just like go for it, just head for the hills. But I definitely, there was one point in Gran Turismo where there was kind of this like near disaster happening. And like, suddenly there were like 4 or 5 people like in front of my desk. And like, if this doesn't happen, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was like, if some contract doesn't get signed in the next 20 minutes, like this work doesn't get done, like I think it was like a floor resurfacing or something, and it was like, it was serious because like these 5 very intelligent people couldn't figure it out.
Right.
And so, and everybody was getting panicky. And so it was like, I do remember like being like, whoa, everybody's panicking right now.
Right.
Like everybody calmed down and basically like kind of went through like one by one and tried to get like what actually is the holdup? What's the problem? So that I could like go straight to that. And like, in 10 minutes it was sorted out and we had 10 minutes to spare or whatever.
Right.
But it was like, I think everybody was so panicked they couldn't even tell what needed to happen,
Right.
So I think that the short answer is some combination of like doing what you can when you can to like ground yourself.
Yeah.
So that, you've got the legs to kind of weather through the storm when it gets crazy. Because there's any amount, I've read so many things that are like, do these things, like these are the habits of great leaders, and it's like, it's like, yeah, but what happens when you literally don't have the time to use the restroom?
Yeah.
It's like,
you have to eat and use the bathroom and conduct meetings all at the same time. And the meetings are panic stricken. Yeah. No, that's good advice. You know what you're getting yourself into. So you build in some stuff before and after. And I guess maybe as much as you can during, but
yeah, but there are periods on these shows kind of where it's just like you don't even like, it's just there's so much going on. It's like you can't bring more people on to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's like by the time that you like tell them about what the problem is and how you need help with it, like it has to have already been solved.
Right.
So hopefully, like as I get better at that, like there'll be more Thomas Jefferson structure to my life. But
so, Justin, one of the things I like asking people, and one of the focuses of the podcast is on communication. So I ask this question to everybody, and I love hearing their answers. But can you tell us about a time when you failed at communicating, whether it's in like a high intense situation or just very mundane everyday stuff? But sometime you failed, and what you learned from it, and after that failure, is there anything about the way you approach communication that changed?
Yeah, so there's a whole range of like levels of communication that are kind of required, I would say, like probably in general in management, but specifically talking about the art department in film. There's like this really high level creative stuff where you don't want to be over specific because you want to make sure that you're not like stifling people's creativity, and that you're getting like part of the excitement is that you're getting these kind of maybe even things that have never been done before, and that you get to like kind of pioneer them in film, like with like these like concept art and stuff like that. And then there's this other like important layer of communication where it's like you need to really be specific, especially with people like carpenters, about how exactly a set's being built and what's important and what's not. And there's really kind of like a brass tacks level of like specific communication. So basically what on this last job I was on, there was like this pit box set, which is when the cars, that's almost like their little garage, like they're really kind of like nicely built out garage. It's called a pit box. And there was one that was required for this character that was kind of like really wealthy, and this is like the normal approach, but it was really accelerated in this film because of our timeline, where it's like you get the briefing, you have conversations, you kind of I get a sense of what the production designer needs and wants and everything like that, and then I put it into effect. And usually there's a round of kind of like we get back and forth with him, we mess with the budget, we see what we can afford, do all that. But in this one in particular, though it often happens, it's like you're just going so quick that there's like decisions being made and things that are happening, because it's like hey, we need to know about this thing right now or whatever. So it's like, all right, we'll do this and then we'll figure that out later. And on this project, there was one instance where basically it like got out in like ahead of me, and not only that, like, which would be a problem kind of under normal circumstances, but it was completely wrong. Like what I had, our art directors and our set designers lay out and our carpenters start to build essentially was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And like once the production designer saw it, you know, he was like, wait, what is this? This is completely wrong. So, you know,
So you got like the vision, not with the shell on it, but just kind of, hey, this is what we're looking for.
yeah.
And you just got it wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, you know, that's probably going to happen no matter what, even in the best of circumstances, like you're going to get some stuff wrong. And that's why, like, we have a fairly robust, like, system of approvals and stuff that, like, try to minimize that.
Right.
But, you know, when the production designer's traveling around the world in one direction and I'm traveling the other, and we're, like, trying to communicate and manage all these people, and trying to track it all, like, you know, inevitably something slips through the cracks when we're moving that quickly. And so, you know, basically we had then to just have like a, you know, crisis mitigation scenario. And it was, you know, basically it was the type of thing where you say, oh man, I don't know how that happened. Like, you know, or my bad, or I'm sorry, or like, was that, you know, it's my miscommunication. And then from there, it's like, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? So we basically brought together like all the people to just like hash it all out and to know what was built, what was drawn, how much time we have, how much money we truly have, whether we can pull money from somewhere else to help, you know, band-aid the situation. And it was, I think that it was like in that process that I realized these different layers, like I kind of was able to start articulating these different layers of communication where it's like, okay, you know, it's almost like, and you so rarely have time, I think, to like tee yourself up and be like, this is how I'm going to communicate this problem,
right,
like to this person. But, you know, I think as you just start to get more of a kind of a reflex for it, you start to be able to say, hey, here's this problem, like go and do that. And then when it's necessary, saying like, this is how I need you to solve it, and being very specific. Because I think that I tend to want to lean in the more creative direction. But, you know, I was finding that there were times where it's like, you know, on the second revision, it was coming back still wrong kind of. And then it's like, okay, do this and then this and then this.
Yeah.
And sometimes I was shortcutting, you know, when we're in these crazy timetables to that very specific direction up front. So, I mean, that scenario, I think really kind of brought it home for me. It was like kind of, you know, when I was shooting from the hip and doing what I thought the production designer wanted to do most of the time, I think I was right most of the time.
Right.
But, you know, it's like knowing when, when to be specific and when to kind of be creative with your direction is part of the art maybe of collaborative artistry.
So in that crisis mitigation scenario, was part of it like, okay, hey, if this happens again, like err to the side of specificity rather than creativity? Or was it more just like, hey, this is a one-time thing, and if this happens again, we'll just figure it out?
Well, I think for me, it was just realizing that there's like two different sets of information almost. Like, I think that I was, you know, like I would say that like kind of before that meeting, and then at least in like the kind of retrospective since, I don't know that I had processed that there were maybe these like two different types of direction that I needed to be able to use, like two different tools basically.
Right.
Yeah, I think that by default I would give people, I'd say, hey, here's the problem. Try this, try that, like whatever, you know.
More creative license.
Yeah. And then I think coming out of that, and just that whole portion of this movie in particular, it was like, oh no, there are times when like it not only serves, you know, the interest of the movie and like my direct superior, but it serves the interest of me and like not wasting the time of the talented person that I'm giving the direction to,
right,
to just tell them what needs to be done, you know, just plain and simple.
Right.
That it's not always like maybe honorable's an intense word for it or something, but you know, it's like, to me, it's like I always want to like honor people's like individual liberty and like problem solving ability, and and it's like, and one way that I try to do that maybe is by saying like, hey, here, you know, take a stab at it, like just try this, try that, whatever, like give them some mushy, like almost lame direction, because it's like, you know, well, hey, like I want you to have some ownership of this, and like this is, you know, it's like I honor your, you know, your individuality. But it was me realizing that it's like, oh, sometimes that isn't the right thing to do.
Right. Sometimes they need specific directions.
Yeah.
Because you got other problems like budget constraints and time. And,
Yeah. Yeah. And then all of a sudden people have to work late because you've given them mushy direction.
Right.
Whereas if you would have just done it right, and then you can find the times that matter to do that in. But it's like, sometimes it's like, just do this and do that, and then we'll move on. But
right. No, that is hard. And that's one of the challenges that the more people I sit down with and like different leadership challenges I face myself, it's like the art of leading and communicating and not the science. Because yeah, I'm like you, I err to the side of like, hey, I want this to be your thing too. Like, I don't want you to do this because I'm telling you to. And then I've had people that are like, bro, just tell me what to do. Like, this would all go well if you just tell me what you want. So
no, I definitely got some of that, and even when people weren't willing to say it to me, it was like, oh, that's like basically like they would much rather. And some of that's personality by like some people don't ever want to get one or the other type of direction. They want the one type, and it hurts when they get the other. But
right, yeah.
But yeah, I think like you're saying, it really is more of an art of like personality or something to know how to give clear direction.
Right. Maybe a certain amount of intuition just to know, okay, in this scenario, I'm talking to Justin, and I think he probably needs this. But the next scenario with the same guy, it might be different.
Right.
Maybe I should try this and see how it goes.
Yeah.
So, all right. So another question I ask everybody, love to hear their answers, is if the present you, gray, a dozen years into film, could go back and visit with the Justin Miller of what, 2007 or something, 2000, whenever you were working at the architecture firm. Like present you could visit with a younger you now with all this hindsight behind you. What advice about leadership would you give yourself?
Yeah, I think it would probably just be to trust yourself and to know that even, a dozen years in and whatever credentials I might have now, it's like I don't feel all that much differently going into it. Like I think that it's more this mindset that even just in the past couple of years that I think a lot of, honestly, the pandemic kind of helped unlock. It's just like, hey, man, like you just don't know. You don't know the future. So like just go into it fearlessly and just like trust yourself that you're going to be able to figure your way out of it. Don't fake it till you make it. Like I've always kind of hated that term. But like just give yourself the benefit of the doubt and don't cut yourself off short. Like don't wait. Don't feel like you have to have this credential or that figured out, or you have to, have done this in order to do that. That just like you should try to move forward in the like boldest way possible and trust that people will, it's like, I'm almost always surprised that like when people take me seriously, like when I go into the room and I'm like, well, I'm sitting with like these, like household name directors and cinematographers and producers and whatever, and they're all taking me completely seriously. Like that's weird. And I feel like, they do that because I accidentally go into the room like as if I know what I'm doing,
right?
Even though I don't feel like I do.
Yeah.
And I don't feel any differently now than I did 12 years ago, kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Well, hey, thanks for the time. I know you're a man on the move, world traveler. So I appreciate you sitting down for an hour or whatever it's been and sharing some of the stuff because it's good. And you live in a unique world that most of us don't get to like see inside, and your role in it it's pretty fascinating. So thanks for unpacking some of that with me. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's an honor. And yeah, I mean, I rarely also like delve into my own world and like think about it that much. So it is helpful, and I think that I'd encourage other people to try and do that a little bit too. Like just take a minute to like kind of think and maybe even talk out loud about what it is that you do.
Mm-hmm. No, it's been good. I've had that feedback from several people I've interviewed. They were like, man, I haven't sat down and reflected, especially self-reflected in 2 decades.
Yeah.
And, it's good exercise. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatecare.com. www.leadinglounge.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.